Go for it.
Okay. Hey everybody. My name's Jessie. I'm going to be presenting on progressive gray matter loss in patients with bipolar disorder. And I realized that this is kind of an old paper. It was published in 2007. So as I was researching for stuff to add in the background, I found a lot more recent research which confirmed that people with bipolar disorder do have progressive gray matter loss, so that was good to see.
Yeah.
I mean, for our...
I know what you mean.
So according to the DSM-5, bipolar disorder, which is kind of off and on, also known as manic depressive disorder or bipolar affective disorder, causes unusual shifts in mood, energy, activity levels, and also the ability to carry out daily living tasks. So in the DSM-5, it's placed between chapters on schizophrenia spectrum and other psychotic disorders, as well as depressive disorders. So it is related to schizophrenia in terms of implicated brain structures and some of the processes that happen in order to, or that cause some of the symptoms, but it's not the same thing. And then to better explain it, I thought I could explain it, but I also found a video which I thought may be better. But also when I was looking up bipolar disorder, I found this picture, and I don't know if it's just me, but the manic guy seems like he's just in finals week. He does not look too happy.
He's doing anything to avoid studying, including cleaning his stove.
I don't know. Like, yeah. So, anyways, okay. I'm gonna share the video.
I've done a lot of cleaning when I had academic work that was due.
But his face is just so.
Yeah, he really doesn't look manic.
Yeah. Okay.
Maybe you've heard the term bipolar used to describe someone who's moody or who has mood swings. But this colloquial use of the term is really different from bipolar disorder. Bipolar disorder, which used to be called manic depression, is a serious mental illness that causes a person to have dramatic shifts in emotions, mood, and energy levels, moving from extreme lows to extreme highs. But these shifts don't happen moment to moment. They usually happen over several days or weeks. There are a few different types of bipolar disorders, but there are some common features. First, the low moods are identical to those in a related disorder, major depressive disorder, also known as unipolar depression. Individuals with this can feel hopeless and discouraged, lack energy and mental focus, and can have physical symptoms like eating and sleeping too much or too little. But along with these lows, the thing that sets bipolar disorders apart from unipolar depression is that individuals can have periods of high moods, which are called manic episodes or hypomanic episodes, depending on their level of severity. In a manic state, people can feel energetic, overly happy or optimistic, even euphoric with really high self-esteem. And on the surface, these might seem like really positive characteristics. But when someone's in a full manic episode, these symptoms can reach a dangerous extreme. A person experiencing mania might invest all of their money in a risky business venture, or they might behave recklessly. Individuals might have pressured speech, where they talk constantly at a rapid-fire pace, or they might have racing thoughts and might feel wired, as if they don't need sleep. Manic episodes can also include delusions of grandeur. Like, for example, they might believe that they're on a personal mission from God, or that they have some supernatural power. And finally, they might make poor decisions without any regard for later consequences. One way to understand these swings is by charting them on a graph. So let's say the y-axis is mood, with mania and depression being on the far end of the axis, and the x-axis is time. The average healthy individual might have normal ups and downs throughout their life, and they might even have some pretty serious lows once in a while, maybe after losing a job or moving to a new place and feeling lonely. An individual with unipolar depression, though, might have normal highs, but they'll probably also have some crushing lows that last for a long period of time and might not even have an obvious trigger. Now, for the bipolar disorders, the first one is called bipolar 1. And these are people that have some major lows that last at least 2 weeks, and then some major highs that last at least a week or require hospitalization. That said, untreated manic episodes can last as long as 3 to 6 months. And even though depression is seen in most cases, it's not actually required for a diagnosis. The second one is called bipolar 2, and this is when a person experiences similar lows and has additional highs called hypomania, which are less severe manic episodes than we see in bipolar 1. To qualify for a diagnosis, these hypomanic states need to last for at least 4 days. Once again, though, these symptoms generally last a few weeks to a few months. All right, the third one's called cyclothymia, or sometimes cyclothymic disorder. And these people have milder lows as well as milder highs, or hypomania like you see in bipolar 2. And they cycle back and forth between these two over a period lasting at least 2 years. Sometimes people with bipolar disorder can show other, less common symptoms as well. For example, having what are referred to as mixed episodes, experiencing symptoms of both depression and mania at the same time. Another symptom they might have is rapid cycling, which describes a situation where a person has 4 or more episodes of depression or mania within a given year. Like most mental health conditions, the exact underlying cause of bipolar disorder isn't known, and there's no single bipolar gene that's been identified. But it's thought that there are genetic and environmental factors that play a part. For example, one interesting clue is that people with family members who have bipolar disorders are 10 times more likely to have it themselves. Another clue is that some drugs and medications can trigger manic episodes, like selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, or SSRIs. It's also worth mentioning that people with bipolar disorder often have other disorders like anxiety disorders, substance abuse disorders, ADHD, and personality disorders as well, making diagnosis and treatment a real challenge. Even though there's no cure for bipolar disorder, identifying and treating individuals is really important, since there's a real danger that the person could harm themselves or even commit suicide. One of the oldest treatments is also one of the most effective treatments, and that's lithium salts. Lithium acts as a mood stabilizer, smoothing out the highs and the lows that they experience. That said, it's much better at treating manic rather than depressive episodes. And so individuals who take it often have to take other medications as well, which can be problematic since some antidepressants, like SSRIs, can trigger manic episodes in people that are predisposed to them. Other treatment options include antipsychotics, anticonvulsants, and benzodiazepines. But many of these, including lithium, have side effects that can be severe and lead to non-adherence, which can be dangerous for the person. Now, unlike certain disorders like unipolar depression, psychological interventions like talk therapy or cognitive behavioral therapy are not particularly effective in treating the manic episodes of bipolar disorder. Having said that, they can still be very helpful tools to help someone with bipolar disorder in general, especially after a manic episode has ended. They can also help the person handle stressful situations that might otherwise lead to a manic episode, thereby helping to prevent a potential manic episode in the first place. Alright, so super fast recap. Bipolar disorder is a mental disorder characterized by depression, periods of lowered mood, as well as mania, periods of a heightened mood. Thanks for watching. You can help support us by donating on Patreon or subscribe.
Okay, so he described a few different types of bipolar disorder, and there are actually more, but I decided not to include them and focus on bipolar 1 because that's the type that they focus on in the paper. So just a really quick recap, bipolar 1 is involved with having major depressive episodes, but also manic episodes. If you're in a manic episode, you may speak really fast, like in an uninterruptible manner where you're just really excited about everything and no one can stop you. You might also be easily distracted, have racing thoughts. You might want to paint your entire house one night or move to some country in the middle of the ocean, or have lots of sex. I don't know. If you're in a major depressive episode, then you will have persistent feelings of sadness, anxiety, guilt, hopelessness. You can't sleep well, you probably can't eat well either. you have fatigue and loss of interest. And like you said, these episodes need to last at least 7 days in order to be diagnosable. And also, like you said, there are no established causes of bipolar disorder, but there are several factors that may be involved. Probably the most important being genetics and or family history. I couldn't really find anything specifically implicating any gene or string of genetic code saying that this causes bipolar disorder, but there was a paper that found a protein which is implicated in the etiology of the disorder, which is diacylglycerol kinase ETA, which is a key protein in a lithium-sensitive metabolic signaling pathway, which I read about. I don't know if I could really explain it that well, but basically in people who have bipolar disorder, there's certain genes that might affect certain enzymes or proteins that are involved in this signaling process, which lithium is particularly effective on.
I can make a quick comment. That's that diacylglycerol kinase ETA. It's a really common second messenger in cells, which basically means that it's critically important for cellular metabolism in a lot of different kinds of cells. So it's kind of it's a bad thing to have a problem with because it's really pervasive.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing is that bipolar disorder is believed to be a polygenic disease, with a lot of genes maybe having a small influence on the cause rather than just one or two. Excuse me. Also, lower white matter integrity or volume in the right temporal lobe may be a biomarker for genetic risk, as well as brain matter deficits in both the right anterior cingulate gyrus and the ventral striatum, which are both involved in emotional processing. So it's not necessarily that this gray matter deficit is just in the presence of bipolar disorder, but it might also be indicative of a genetic risk. To further illustrate that, some cross-sectional studies have shown that higher numbers of manic episodes are associated with less gray matter volume in prefrontal brain areas. And I think that's mainly why they focused on bipolar 1 disorder in a lot of research, but also in the paper that I'm going to present, because it does involve those manic episodes, whereas bipolar 2 or cyclothymia involve hypomania, which isn't quite as intense, or I don't think it's as involved in terms of structures and processes. There's also neuroanatomical abnormalities, which may act as risk factors for bipolar disorder, not just consequences of having this disorder. So possible risk factors may include volumetric abnormalities in white matter, the striatum, hippocampus, amygdala, and the subgenual prefrontal cortex, which I didn't know was the Brodmann area 25, which is why I included pictures in case anyone else didn't know. This blue arrow pointing to the number 25 right here is the subgenual prefrontal cortex. And if you want to see a more realistic view of it, the top picture. Just kidding, that's not your whole brain. Okay, so these areas are involved in thinking, long-term memory, as well as emotional processing. Finally, the larger right inferior frontal gyrus, the volume of that could aid in the identification of subjects at risk for bipolar disorder. And I had some stuff about that, but it's not in my notes. Okay, so now some background for the study specifically. Studies of people with bipolar disorder have shown a reduced cell number or dysplasia in the hippocampus, as well as structural abnormalities in the amygdala. where they found volumes increased in adults with bipolar disorder, and they found volume decreases in the amygdala for children and adolescents with bipolar. So that means that children and adolescents had smaller amygdalas compared to adults. So that's kind of implying that as the disease progresses, the amygdala gets bigger.
Does imply that.
Okay, so also the amygdala and hippocampus provide inputs to the prefrontal striatal thalamic circuits, which are involved in emotional function, which make them of particular interest to bipolar disorder. Also, functional imaging studies have found that abnormal metabolism and activation of the amygdala and hippocampus in bipolar patients. And also the direction of this effect depends on the emotional valence of the stimuli. So they've done studies where they show bipolar patients pictures of emotional faces, and they have to recognize what expression they're making. And I'm pretty sure that the more manic episodes they experience, the less likely they are to judge a facial expression correctly. Additional structure and cognitive abnormalities may be acquired with each further episode of the illness, which then in turn leads to increased likelihood of relapse. So, for instance, those with a greater degree of cognitive impairment have a worse prognosis, meaning they might not live as long or they might have more episodes. Bipolar disorder is also associated with deficits in memory function, and other evidence suggests that the hippocampus is closely involved with this association. No studies have directly related cognitive deficits in people with bipolar disorder to the medial temporal lobe volume reductions that are often seen. So there may be a progressive element to the pathophysiology of bipolar disorder that's mediated by this progressive hippocampal reduction or atrophy. So the authors of the study hypothesized that patients with bipolar disorder would show progressive hippocampal reductions, and they used this special analysis methodology on their MRI scans, which they collected a baseline and then also another scan 4 years later. And they also predicted that gray matter reductions would be related to changes in cognitive performance occurring over that 4-year period. This study was done in Scotland, so America is not the only crazy place. This was 10 years ago. They collected 21 patients that had bipolar 1 disorder and also matched 21 controls who were recruited from the community. And actually, the control patients were people that the bipolar patients knew. So they weren't related to them in any way, but they were just social contacts, which I thought was kind of interesting for them to do it that way. The bipolar patients were identified from caseloads of consultant psychiatrists the researchers were affiliated with. They, of course, had to fulfill, at the time, the DSM-4 criteria for bipolar 1 disorder, and then their diagnoses were also established using the operational criteria symptom checklist, and further confirmed using the structured clinical interview for the DSM-4. They were clinically stable at study entry. They had the mean duration of the disorder for around 14 years, and their median number of previous hospitalizations was around 4. And I thought this was important to point out because the more hospitalizations that one with bipolar disorder has had could lead to, more medication or possibly even more therapy, which could affect the outcome or the symptoms. Their controls also lived in the same region as everyone, and they were confirmed to not have bipolar disorder. So participants were group matched for age, sex, and premorbid IQ. And I assume it's just a control for any brain differences that people might have, whether it be across sex or age, particularly when they're comparing people who have a mental illness with people who don't. The exclusion criteria for both of the groups was they could not have a history of head injury, they could not have a neurological disorder, any drug dependence, learning disabilities, couldn't be pregnant or have implants, I'm assuming for the MRI machine. So really, besides the history of head injury, Sasha, you don't think you'd be able to participate?
Well, and the implants, and I basically have all those except the pregnancy. So I'm trying to get in with what's his name? What's his name from Junior? Movie Junior
Can't remember.
with Arnold Schwarzenegger and
Yeah, right.
Oh, yeah, where he gets pregnant.
the guy.
Danny DeVito?
Yeah, Danny DeVito. I'm trying to get in contact with him so he can get me pregnant because I want a child from that man.
Good luck with that. I think he'd be a really good father or mother.
So yeah, that relates to the study. So they also collected clinical and cognitive measures to see if the gray matter loss.
I love the name of that first scale.
The Young Mania.
The Young Mania rating scale. For some reason, that seems very funny to me. Is that because the person's name was Young, or, was it just for Young Mania? I bet we don't know, do we? Someone will find out in the next 30 seconds, I predict.
So their clinical symptoms were assessed by a psychiatrist using the Young Mania rating scale, the Hamilton Depression rating scale, and the positive and negative symptom scale, which is based on findings that schizophrenia comprises at least two distinct syndromes of positive productive symptoms and negative deficit features. So just to kind of show that these two disorders are related. All subjects underwent a baseline assessment of their premorbid IQ using the NART, which I need to add a note of the full name, which I don't have.
I like the NART, that's a great name.
And also a current performance verbal IQ. Their memory was assessed repeatedly, and this test, the RBMT, which I don't know the full name of because I don't have notes for, was shown to be sensitive to subtle changes in everyday memory function, and this is important because we're looking at hippocampal deficits.
I don't really see how they got their premorbid IQ unless they went back in time an average of 14 years.
Yeah, I think for them, the premorbid was before it got worse in the 4 years.
Oh, maybe so, yeah. Okay. Yeah, they should have called it that. Like their baseline IQ at the beginning of the thing, yeah.
I'm surprised they didn't include like average age of the participants
Yeah, I
or
was
any
gonna
other
ask
kind
about
of
that.
descriptives.
Yeah.
They used a 1.5T GE MRI scanner, which I found one on eBay for $200,000 in case anyone's interested. They took a midline sagittal localization followed by 2 additional sequences to image the whole brain.
So 1.5, that's 1.5 Tesla, so that's like a moderate power MRI, that's not the super powered one.
Yeah, and this was 10 years ago,
Yeah.
so.
So probably back then it was a super powered one.
Yeah.
And GE stands for General Electric, I think.
I tried to find videos or pictures or anything to explain this tensor-based morphometry, but as I read and tried to summarize it for the presentation, it's not that difficult to understand. It's actually just a form of analysis for the brain images. So basically it identifies differences in local shape in brain structures and also examines the relative volumes of those structures. So it just looks at shape and volume, which is what we are interested in for the study. It uses a high-dimensional warping field.
I've been watching way too much Star Trek.
To match an image of a subject's anatomy from a base point to its shape later on, so baseline to 4 years for the study. It's able to distinguish intrinsic changes in brain anatomy from these translational shifts, which are caused by imperfect image registration, which I guess happens in MRI scans. And they went on and on in the paper about how tensor-based morphometry is so much better than voxel-based morphometry. So,
Can you go back to the slide right before? See how it says midline sagittal localization? So I think what they do is they like set up these like benchmarks in the brain, and they scan it. And then 4 years later, they scan it again, and they still have these same benchmarks. So what they then try to do is overlay the new scan on the old scan, but because there are differences in the way the scan is taken, some of the differences between the images are not the result of differences in the brain. They're just a result of trying to overlay the two things accurately on each other, right? So somehow this method compensates for that, so that the differences between the two images are really based on differences in the brain instead of just crappy methodology. So it's like they talk about a warp field. What they mean is, if you have, like, let's say you're trying to, you've got a study with 10 people in it, and you want to look at all of their brain scans at the same time. Well, not everybody's brain is shaped the same. So you have to warp them so that they all like the same part of the brain is overlying the same part of the brain on everybody's scan. So they call that a warp field, which is wrong because it doesn't have anything to do with traveling fast. But anyway, I think they're basically saying have a better way of doing that, so that.
I imagine it's only improved.
Yes.
And also, this is the first study to apply this method specifically to people with bipolar disorder. Furthermore, just to kind of explain it, the longitudinal change of this 4-year period in gray matter density was assessed using the MRI machine and was then evaluated using this tensor-based morphometry with this specialized software. The age, the interscan interval, and the sex were included as covariates in the analyses. And the differences in the images compared between the bipolar 1 subjects and the control subjects in this specialized software used general linear modeling. Did you have the whole brain analysis also supplemented, or was supplemented with a small volume correction image for both the amygdala and the hippocampus.
So is that like a focus in on that one area or something specifically?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think it's
That's kind of what I got out of it.
this, yeah.
Because they were really interested specifically in that area, so they did extra, like, processing in that area to make sure that everything was overlaid correctly on everything else.
So for the cognitive and clinical correlations, they found significant clusters of gray and white matter loss in individual cluster mass volumes. They imported this data into SPSS, and they used discriminant function analysis to predict group membership. So they were seeing if gray matter loss predicted whether they had bipolar disorder or they were the control in the control group. The changes in gray and white matter density were estimated and compared with their cognitive function, so their different types of IQ, as well as their clinical outcomes. So again, the subgroups of patients were defined by treatment with classes of medication at their baseline. So whether they were on lithium or on mood stabilizers. So all participants except one bipolar subject underwent the reassessment at the 4-year follow-up. 17 out of 20 of the bipolar patients were euthemic, which just means that they were in a stable mood. So they weren't in a manic or a depressive episode, but they also hadn't had either of those episodes for a period of time. Subjects had on average, during the 4-year period, 1 depressive and 1 manic or hypomanic episode. And the number of manic episodes that occurred during the follow-up period were correlated with gray matter loss in both the cerebellum and temporal lobe. And I might have more notes about that, but my tablet died. So. Can you guys see the parts on the brain scan okay?
The white.
Yeah, because if not, I...
It is really a bad color choice on their part.
Yeah, I made it yellow. Can you see that better?
Much better.
Okay. So even though it's yellow and that spectrum includes yellow in it, which I didn't realize till after I did it, it's really white. So it's a very high T statistic. So I put a little square of yellow there just to let you know that was my fault. So I tried really hard to figure out how to accurately read this scan, and I still don't know. But I think that the two left images here are of the bipolar patients, and I'm assuming that this is the baseline, and this is at the 4-year follow-up period. And the only reason that I assume that is because this region here, which is, I think it's the cerebellum, it gets smaller, so they said they saw reductions in that. And
My
those-
guess is that that's probably not right, but my reason for thinking that is the numbers that you see up there, and those sort of imply that it's moving through a single brain, like each one of those, like -12 at the bottom. What the heck was
That
that?
was an agenda.
I thought it was, somebody's photon torpedoes going off. Yeah, I know, it's pathetic. So if you look at the very top left, it says, what, -42? And then the bottom it says -12. So that makes me think that it's some kind of sequential slices we're looking at, and I'm betting that the yellow areas are the ones that were significantly different between the groups.
Yeah. Okay.
So those are just the differences. I don't think they're comparing, I don't think there's a illustration of one versus the other. I think they're just showing us what was different
Okay.
without having us
Yeah.
see the two differences. Just, that's my theory.
Yeah. I think that was my initial theory, and then I thought, why are there so many? I don't know.
They just want to drive us crazy
Yeah,
with
they definitely
too
didn't
much
explain
data.
it in any way, shape, or form. So, but the top two rows are the cerebellum, and this third row here is the fusiform gyrus, and then the last one is the hippocampus. So they saw gray matter loss, more gray matter loss in bipolar patients compared to the controls. They saw greater gray matter loss in bipolar patients in the left hippocampus, the fusiform gyrus, and the cerebellum. Bipolar patients also showed some evidence of lower gray matter density in the inferior temporal cortex compared to the controls, and they did not find significant differences in white matter.
So by that you mean there was no difference in the amount of change? So like whatever change there was in the controls in white matter was the same as the change in the bipolar people in white matter?
Yeah, at least there was
Okay.
no significant.
There's no difference between the two groups, okay.
I included pictures of the fusiform gyrus because I had forgot where they were, so just in case anyone else did. It's in this highlighted area, and the progressive reductions in the hippocampal and fusiform gray matter were substantially separated the bipolar and the control groups, and they were associated with progressive deterioration in general intellectual function as well.
Does anybody remember another time that we've talked about the fusiform gyrus? Sally said the fusiform face area. Yeah, there's a part of the fusiform gyrus, actually several parts of it, that are involved in the recognition and perception of faces in particular, and also body parts. So, interesting. Did you say they had trouble recognizing emotions?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's also involved in object
Oh, yes.
visual, perception too. And other studies have found that abnormalities in bipolar patients, they demonstrated using facial affect recognition tests, suggests that this region may also play a role in emotional processing, as well as sustained attention.
I had never heard that about bipolar people. I didn't realize they had that kind of deficit.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it's the same as some of the brain damage
Right.
people are receiving. Not that they couldn't necessarily recognize their faces, just they had more
Slower
difficulty.
or something like that.
Yeah.
Is that more when they're in their manic episodes that they have problems recognizing facial expressions?
So it's not when they're in a manic episode, but the more manic episodes that they've experienced was related to that difficulty. Yeah, so that kind of implies that the more episodes you have, particularly the manic episodes, the more it changes your brain. So this graph shows the discriminant function analysis that they did to predict which group they belonged in, whether they were bipolar or the control patients. And basically it just shows that the amount of gray matter loss that the participants had, if they were bipolar, then they had more temporal gray matter loss, since they are leaning more towards the end on the x-axis, and then also more cerebellar gray matter loss, whereas the control patients were closer to the 0 mark.
Wow, that's a really good distinction. I mean, it's not perfect, obviously, but it's pretty amazing.
Yeah. So just to be a little more specific, the temporal lobe cluster value correctly classified around 86% of the control subjects and around 65% of the bipolar subjects. So yeah, that's pretty good. Okay. So the cognitive results, they found significant and of course non-significant findings. Reductions in the full scale and performance IQ was significantly associated with this gray matter loss in the temporal lobe. And additionally, there was a negative association between gray matter loss in the cerebellum and their verbal IQ reductions over time, just in bipolar subjects. I put question marks and tried to explain it to myself because they're saying that a negative association between gray matter loss and verbal IQ reductions. So it's two negatives, gray matter loss and IQ reductions, but there's a negative association. So I took that as,
That's weird.
yeah, the more gray matter loss the bipolar patients had, the less
The
their
better
verbal
their
IQ
IQ.
reduced. Yeah, I don't know. It was.
Let me see if I can, I'll just look at that and see if I can
Yeah.
determine if it was just, they wrote it incorrectly or something. But anyway, go on. I'll check it out.
Does anybody have a guess as to what they're trying to say? Okay, I'm glad I'm not the only one. In terms of their non-significant findings, the changes in neuropsychological test scores were not significant in either group, and they didn't differ between the groups. They also didn't find any relationships between gray matter loss and their scores on memory, or relationship between gray matter loss and their prescription of any class of drug that they might have been on. Even though their hippocampus was reduced, they didn't see any significant memory impairment, which was interesting. So it kind of says that it's not, big brains aren't necessarily better.
I don't know, I kind of want mine.
Unless
to
you have a big
be
head,
possible.
then good for you. Okay. So for the hippocampal deficit results, they found new evidence that, this study has shown new evidence that patients with bipolar disorder do lose gray matter in their hippocampus and their fusiform gyrus and their cerebellum at a greater rate than age and sex-matched control subjects. They also found that progressive reductions in hippocampal and fusiform gray matter separated the groups and were associated with a progressive deterioration in general intellectual function. And this suggests that there may be an ongoing pathological process in people with bipolar disorder that may lead to a cognitive decline. And I did read quite a few papers that said people with bipolar disorder tend to have more cognitive impairments. So it could be due to these structural changes that happen over the time that they have the disorder. There's also no evidence that hippocampal deficits are present premorbidly or in unaffected relatives, which leads to the belief that hippocampal deficits emerge as the illness develops. So it may be a marker of accelerated aging or just an ongoing pathological process. But it also goes to show that it may not be a cause of the disorder rather than a consequence. So in terms of the fusiform gyrus gray matter loss, studies of people at high risk for both affective and non-affective psychosis have also demonstrated a reduction in fusiform gyrus volume as they develop their illness. And like we mentioned before, the fusiform areas involved in face and object visual perception. Also, abnormalities of fusiform activation in bipolar subjects has been demonstrated using these spatial affect recognition tests, and it suggests that this region may play a role. So I've already said all this, I don't know why I'm saying it again. Also, reductions in fusiform gyrus gray matter have been previously demonstrated in bipolar disorder, but increases have also been shown. So I can't remember which study showed that specifically in terms of if it was actually bipolar 1 disorder and if they considered how many episodes they had, etc. So it also goes to show that research is lies most of the time. It's not true.
Say that.
Only
You
some.
can't get away with that.
It also has not been possible to determine whether these functional deficits are consequences or causes of these structural changes in people with bipolar disorder. Also, the increased cerebellar gray matter loss in bipolar disorders has been related to earlier work demonstrating this cerebellar volume reduction in people with bipolar disorder. Patients with multi-episode bipolar disorder have shown to have smaller cerebellar vermal volumes, which include the medial corticonuclear zone of the cerebellum, which in that picture is this middle area here where this person put a question mark because they didn't know what it was either.
Tuber. Doesn't sound good.
And although no white matter changes were found in the study, cerebellar gray matter clusters overlap with white matter. So I think I have it written down. So cerebellar gray matter loss. I don't know, it's not really right. Basically, I read a study that said that gray matter loss accompanied white matter increase in bipolar patients. And being that gray matter is made up of cell bodies and white matter is made up of axons, it kind of said that basically if you're losing cell bodies but you're creating more connections, it can kind of lead to this idea that bipolar is involved with like overactive connections in the brain.
Mm-hmm.
At least that's how I interpreted it.
It makes sense. So they're basically saying that they didn't find white matter changes using this methodology. They
Right.
said that, but then they're also saying, but we also found decreases in gray matter, so there might have been white matter increases at the same time we just didn't detect.
Yeah, well, that actually was from other
Right, but are
studies,
you basically proposing that might be what happened here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Along with other studies, these results didn't show progressive change in the amygdala volume over time. But other cross-sectional studies have shown that the amygdala increases in adults and decreases in children. So this suggests the possible relationship between increased amygdala volumes as one increases in age or as the duration lasts. A current longitudinal study that I found suggests that amygdala changes do not occur in those with the established illness because I think it was a period of 6 or 8 years at a baseline, and then however many years later they didn't find amygdala changes. So again, some people have changes in that particular structure and some don't. Additionally, in the population for this study, the prescription of lithium, antidepressant, anticonvulsant, or antipsychotic medications were not associated with this gray matter loss over the 4-year period for people with bipolar disorder. So the lack of these medication effects suggests that the change in the brain structures over time can't be explained simply in terms of how they were being treated at the time that they entered the study. So basically, they're saying that these kind of established medications that help reduce symptoms for people with bipolar aren't necessarily changing brain structures. So this study showed first-time evidence of progressive hippocampal gray matter reductions in bipolar disorder that are also associated with a decline in cognitive performance, which implies a progressive and neurodegenerative aspect to bipolar disorder that could be developed further as a biomarker of the disease or as a clinical outcome. Future research should look at brain plasticity and neurodegeneration as mediators of this relationship. And furthermore, stress-induced neuronal degeneration and or dendritic remodeling is also associated with mania and may be possible explanations for the observed gray matter loss that other studies have found in manic groups. It also agrees with the idea that mania precedes this gray matter loss. So again, it kind of goes back to this whole, if you have manic episodes, then you're going to have gray matter loss, but it could be that you have gray matter loss and they could contribute to the manic episodes, so who knows. And also, Catherine will be presenting on Alzheimer's disease, so I was seeing how these disorders, if and how they were related. And there are some recent studies, and I know you can't see that at all, but this one was done in 2016, I believe. I think this one was done in 2015. That one's a little older, I think 2009. But they have found relationships between a risk or an occurrence of dementia or Alzheimer's with people who have bipolar disorder later on in life. Not that their symptoms start to occur later on in life, but just that they've had the disorder and they've reached a later point in their life. And also lithium use for people with bipolar disorder. I can't remember what this study said on the far right, but they explored whether it was a risk for Alzheimer's disease. And then I found some stuff for you to look at to forget everything that I said.
I like the one on the right.
Yeah.
Polar bear with some kind of, I think it's a polar bear. He has bipolar disorder.
Right, but I think he's wearing a
Oh,
penguin
he's dressed
costume.
as a penguin. Oh, I get it. I like the beak. That's extra good. I might go as a polar bear dressed as a penguin to my next Halloween party. I think that would be a very creative. So what's the deal on the left? I don't know who that is. Who are those guys? They're some kind of,
It's a like popular little comic.
yeah, I know, that's why, I
Yeah.
just don't know who that, what's the name of it?
Cyanide and Happiness.
Okay.
I
Which one is which?
don't know. Actually.
So are they basically, the ring is supposed to be flashing or something?
Yeah, I
Okay.
think so. So
Just Sherry off because she's not here, and it looks like, I think Jeff came in here, did he? So guess what, Greg, you're the only person here